most satisfying things about life is whenever your expectations get met. When something that you are waiting for a long time and anticipating finally comes to fruition and fulfillment. Like for many of us, we are coming into this holiday season. We've had Thanksgiving, we have Christmas coming up, and there is your favorite dish that you have every single year, that you only have around this time. And you are waiting for that time when you get to have your favorite dish at this party. And you're thinking to yourself, that dish better be there so I can enjoy it to its fullest extent. Or you can think of us counting down the days on the calendar for something to finally arrive. That birthday party. That wedding day, that birthday. There's so many times in life where we are waiting in anticipation for something. When that day finally arrives, there's a rush of excitement that overwhelms us. And that's kind of where Israel was at 2,000 years ago. They had spent hundreds of years in anticipation for a king, a Christ, a Messiah to arrive. That they were waiting for the day when God's king would come in and rescue them and restore them to their proper place, to bring justice against the enemies of Israel. And what the New Testament teaches is that the Christ finally arrived through the man named Jesus of Nazareth. And what's amazing is that the New Testament, the Gospels in particular, say over and over again that Jesus, his life and certain actions in his life fulfilled different prophecies about the coming Messiah from hundreds of years ago. That Jesus fulfills these moments that the prophets talked about long ago. And so for the next few weeks, we are going to look at these different Old Testament passages that share about things that Jesus fulfilled upon arriving as the Messiah. And I think it's going to teach us a lot. It's going to teach us, one, how to be better readers of our Bible, how we can read our Bible well and accurately and faithfully. And then also, it's going to teach us a whole lot about Jesus, who Jesus really is, and why it matters who he is. But then I think also these passages are going to share some really significant things about us and how we are to live out today in light of these realities. The first passage we're going to look at today is the very beginning of Jesus' arrival as the Christ, what we call the virgin birth. This is shared in Matthew. Matthew has this pattern where he says that something that Jesus did or something that happens related to Jesus fulfills what the prophets say. And this happens with the virgin birth narrative. So if we were to go to Matthew 1, we'll just have it on the screen right here. Matthew 1 shares this. The birth of Jesus Christ came about this way. After his mother, Mary, had been engaged to Joseph, it was discovered before they came together that she was pregnant from the Holy Spirit. So her husband, Joseph, being a righteous man and not wanting to disgrace her publicly, decided to divorce her secretly. But after he had considered these things, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream, saying, "Joseph, son of David, don't be afraid to take Mary as your wife, because what has been conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit. So she will give birth to a son, and you are to name him Jesus, because he will save his people from their sins." Now, all this took place to fulfill what was spoken by the Lord through the prophet. And so this next part that's in italics is a quote from an Old Testament prophet. "See, the virgin will become pregnant and give birth to a son, and they will name him Emmanuel." And then Matthew helps us understand what Emmanuel means by saying, which is translated God is with us, or God with us, depending on, both options are valid there. This is an amazing moment where Matthew is saying that a prophecy 600 years before Jesus even existed pointed to a day where a virgin would conceive and give birth to a son that declares that God is with us. And Matthew says that Jesus' birth from the Virgin Mary is in fulfillment of this prophecy. Now, if that's true, that is amazing. I mean, this is a miraculous event for a virgin who has never has had sexual relations with a man to be able to conceive is miraculous in itself. But for a prophecy to declare this years and years prior is even more miraculous. It's, if true, then it gives all the more credentials to who Jesus is. And it gives all the more trustworthiness to who what Matthew is saying about Jesus. And if we want to be good readers of our Bible, what we need to do today is go back to that original prophecy and just explore what is said in this passage, in its context, in its meaning. Because when we do that, we might actually discover some unusual and interesting details. So this is a passage what Matthew quotes here is a passage in Isaiah that was written about 600 years before Jesus, sometime around 735 BC or something. Jesus was born around 4 BC, give or take a couple years. What ends up happening, so 600, 700 years, depending on how you date things. It's a long story. But we just can't get into it. And lost my train of thought there. Okay, so let me give you some context for what this passage is leading up to. So we're going to the very beginning of that passage in Isaiah. It talks about how there's a certain historical context for when this prophecy was shared. Let me give you the footnotes. During this time period, when Isaiah is writing, the people of God were split into two nations. The northern kingdom was called the kingdom of Israel. The southern kingdom was called the kingdom of Judah. These were two nations that were split in half after various issues and unfaithfulness to God that happened. Various kings reigned in Israel and Judah. In Israel, all of the kings were wicked. Every single one of them led the people further and further away from God. They were unfaithful to God and through. But in the southern kingdom of Israel, southern kingdom, Judah, kind of had a mixed bag. There were some good kings, but there was also a lot of wicked kings. And at the time of this prophecy, there's a king that comes to power in Judah named Ahaz. And as we are reading about Ahaz, we, the audience, are left with a question. What kind of king is Ahaz going to be? Is he going to follow the line of good kings and be faithful to God and God's ways? Or is he going to be a wicked king and lead the people away from God and God's ways? And so there's this tension boiling under the surface. But then on top of that, what is going on currently in the historical moment is that Israel and another northern kingdom, another northern nation named Aram, are conspiring together to come into Judah and invade and take over the city of Jerusalem, which is the capital city. They wanted to dethrone the king, Ahaz. And of course, the people in Judah are all in fear, because if these two nations do that, little old Judah, which is a tiny little group of people, they're not going to be able to withstand that force. And Ahaz, he's especially quaking in his boots. I don't know if he was actually wearing boots, but he was terrified because it meant one of two things. One, he's definitely going to get kicked off the throne and be replaced with a puppet for them. But two, it's very likely, very possible that he was going to get killed whenever that happens. And so the entire land is in fear of what's going on. And so God sends his prophet Isaiah to speak to King Ahaz. Isaiah prophets, they're God's mouthpiece. They're like a megaphone that speaks on behalf of God. And God, and Isaiah, he's talking to Ahaz, and Isaiah is telling Ahaz, calm down. You do not need to worry. Those two kingdoms that are coming in that you're worried about, God is going to wipe them out. He is going to protect Judah and keep you safe. Isaiah says the only thing that Ahaz has to do in order for that to happen is to be reliant on God, to place his faith and keep a firm faith in his God. And so there's a question. What is Ahaz going to do? Is he going to be a good king and put his faith in God, or is he going to be a wicked king and reject God? And that's where we're going to pick up. We're going to see that this story continues. If you have a Bible, why don't you join me today in Isaiah chapter 7. We'll be in chapter 7 this morning. And where we're going to pick up is we're going to see that God is going to offer Ahaz a sign. He's going to offer and say, Ahaz, if you want this, you can have it. Here's what he says in Isaiah 7, verse 10 and following. Then the Lord spoke again to Ahaz. Ask for a sign from the Lord your God. It can be as deep as Sheol or as high as heaven. But Ahaz, as high as heaven. We'll pause right there real quick. God is here. He is offering a sign to Ahaz. That he wants Ahaz to feel encouragement and assurance that what God says about the future is going to happen. He wants scared, fearful, trembling Ahaz to feel confident that his God will protect him and that he can rely on this God, that the future is certain and certainly in God's hands. And so God is saying, Ahaz, you ask for a sign from me. It can be whatever you want. I will move heaven and earth for you, just to prove who I am to you. Ahaz, if you want, I will raise the dead up from Sheol. Ahaz, if you want, I'll have gold rain down from heaven. You tell me, I'll do it because I want to prove to you who I am. And this is the God of all things. This is the creator of the universe giving a free chance for someone to be assured that this is the God of all things. Who wouldn't take up that chance to feel assurance and confidence that this God is true and real and on your side? So what's Ahaz going to do? Is he going to take up that offer? Here's what Ahaz does in the next verse. But Ahaz replied, I will not ask. I will not test the Lord. Ahaz, he refuses to take up God's offer for a sign. He's actually kind of, in one way, is being kind of respectable here. It almost feels like he's trying to honor God, because back in the book of Deuteronomy, we see that the Hebrew people are said that they are to not test the Lord your God. And so it almost seems like Ahaz is going, I don't want to break your commands, God, so I'm not going to test you. But there's something a little different in these circumstances. The most obvious is that Ahaz is not going to God demanding a sign. God is coming to Ahaz offering a sign. And Ahaz is saying, I don't want your sign. But there's also something else here. Because Ahaz, he's kind of being double-faced here. He wants to be all pious and faithful to God, but he's really playing a mask because behind the scenes, he's doing something else. If you were to go to 2 Kings, you would find that King Ahaz, meanwhile, is conspiring with another king, with another nation, the nation Assyria. And he's going to work with Assyria to help to get Assyria to come in and destroy Judah, destroy Israel and Aram. And he's working with this other guy to make it all happen. And so what Ahaz is really doing by rejecting God's offer for a sign is Ahaz is saying, God, I don't need you. God, I've got it all figured out. I've got it taken care of. I'll put my faith in, I'll put my loyalty, I'll put my trust into this other nation rather than you. I don't need you. And that's pretty clear where Ahaz lands. Ahaz is certainly not one of the righteous, good kings of Judah. He is one of the evil, wicked kings who has rejected God through and through. And God, he's a patient God. He's a merciful God. He waits and waits. But when someone finally puts their foot in the ground and is steadfast in it, God's patience wears thin. Here's what Isaiah says in response. Isaiah said, listen, house of David. Ahaz is from the lineage of David. Is it not enough for you to try the patience of men? Will you also not try the patience of God? You see, what has happened is that over and over, the people of God were waiting for Ahaz to do something, to do something well, but their patience has run thin. And here, God's patience has run thin. And when God's patience runs thin, their action will have to take place. So what is God going to do? God is going to give Ahaz a sign anyway. But it's not going to be the perfect sign that he once offered. It's going to have some mixed feelings upon it. But understand, all that we read is context for the sign that we are about to read, okay? That this is a sign for Ahaz as a result of everything that's taken place. Here is the sign in verse 14. Therefore, the Lord himself will give you a sign. See, the virgin will conceive, have a son, and name him Emmanuel. And the name Emmanuel means God is with us, as Matthew said to us earlier when we looked. It's a symbolic name to represent God's presence in their midst. God, he gives Ahaz a sign, even though Ahaz doesn't want a sign, that a virgin's going to conceive and that this virgin's going to have a son, and this son is going to be named Emmanuel as a representation of God's presence in their midst, as a way to show God is there and faithful and with Judah. But there's some details here that we gotta kind of work through before we can keep moving forward. The word that was translated virgin here is a really important word we have to define. The Hebrew word here is the Hebrew word almah. This is a word that is better translated, and is translated elsewhere outside the single verse, is translated as young woman. This word is describing an unmarried woman, a young unmarried woman. In this culture, in a Hebrew culture, an unmarried woman would be a virgin. Now, like 99.999% of women would not have sex before getting married because it was part of their religious faithfulness to God and part of their commands. And so an alma was an unmarried woman, and as a result of that would be a virgin. But the emphasis on this term is not that the woman is a virgin. If Isaiah wanted to say that this woman was a virgin, there's another term used in the Hebrew scriptures that means virgin, but he chooses the word alma. Now, what's interesting, though, is that in the Greek translation of the Hebrew scriptures, they do use a word for virgin. But here, in the Hebrew text, in the original text that Isaiah is writing from, he is using a term that is more generally describing a woman that's not emphasizing her virginity. The point I'm making with this that we need to clarify before we can move forward is that when Isaiah is speaking this, he's not saying that a virgin is going to miraculously conceive as a sign for Ahaz. What he is saying is that this woman is unmarried currently, will get married, will conceive, and then will have a son and will name him Emmanuel. Now, I know some of you are getting a little worried about my theology. Stick with me, okay? This is so important before we can move forward that we get this right. We have to be good readers of our Bibles. Now, who is this woman? Who is this woman that's going to conceive? We don't know. In fact, scholars debate on who this woman's referring to. Some scholars will say that this woman is actually Isaiah's wife, that Isaiah's wife will have a son in the near future and she will name him Emmanuel. This lines up with what we see with the other names of Isaiah's sons. His sons all have special names which have deep symbolic meaning. And throughout the prophets, names of children have deep symbolic meaning, so that's possible. It's also possible that some scholars think that this woman is actually part of the royal house of David, that this is someone that is from the royal house and will have a son and will have the son named Emmanuel. But we don't know. I kind of lean towards that second option, that it would be someone that Ahaz was familiar with, that would know of this woman, and that this woman would eventually have this son, and Ahaz would be aware of all this. But here's the point that Isaiah is trying to make with this sign. What he's telling Ahaz is that in the near future, and maybe the next couple years, there's going to be a woman you know who's going to get married, she's going to have a kid, and without knowing any details of this sign that I'm giving you, she's going to coincidentally name this son Emmanuel. And she's going to be totally ignorant about the significance of that detail, but you, Ahaz, you're going to know everything that means. Now, this sign to Ahaz here is not a sign because of a miraculous conception from a virgin. The sign here is that God is aware and already knows about a son that's going to be born, and a son whose name is already known before the woman even conceives the son. This is a sign that points to God's complete sovereignty and knowledge. That by pointing to this sign, God is saying, I already know the future. I know what's going ahead. I am in control of all things, Ahaz. I even know this son's name. Surely I have all the future of Judah in my hands too. That's what his point is with this sign. And this sign to Ahaz is a double-edged sword. In one sense, this is a sign that points to the deliverance of Judah, the rescue, the salvation of Judah. But it's also a sign that points to some oncoming judgment. Look at what the results of this sign are in the following verses. By the time Emmanuel learns to reject what is bad and choose what is good, he will be eating curds and honey. But before the boy knows to reject what is bad and choose what is good, the land of the two kings you dread will be abandoned. The Lord will bring on you, your people, and your father's house such a time he has never been since Ephraim separated from Judah. He will bring the king of Assyria. God says that before this son will even grow to complete maturity, that's what it means by the idea of knowing, choosing good and rejecting evil. By the time the son grows into wise maturity, before that even happens, the nations that you're worried about, Ahaz, they're going to be ransacked. They're going to be abandoned. There's going to be judgment on these people. Judah's going to be kept safe. But Ahaz, because you rejected my offer, there's going to be some judgment coming on Judah as well. That the king that you've chose to rely on instead of me, the king that you've put your faith in instead of me, he's going to come in and betray you. He's going to come in and ruin Judah along with the other nations. And we see that end up happening. We see in the future, in history, we see that the northern land of Israel comes in and is completely wiped out by the Assyrian army. And then they scatter and they dissolve away. And then all of a sudden, before they know it, the land of Judah comes in, is overtaken by Assyrian soldiers. And then Jerusalem ends up being surrounded by the Assyrian army. It's a double-edged sword. The sign is for Ahaz. It's a sign, but it's a sign that means something so significant here. But I think as we think about this message in this passage, I think there's two important ideas that we can take away from this dynamic, this conversation between Isaiah and Ahaz. But before we move on, the first idea that I want us to think about here that Isaiah teaches us through this conversation is that God is totally and absolutely sovereign. To be sovereign means that God is just over all things. He is in control of it all. That God is all-knowing. He is all-powerful. He is totally over all things. All things are in his hands. And so whenever life gets difficult, whenever we face challenges, whenever we have anxieties, whenever we have worries, whenever we have fears, may we never forget that the God we worship is sovereign. May we never forget that the God we serve, the God we call Lord, is over all things, and all things are in his hands, and surely he will protect his people. But then the second idea that we can draw from in this conversation with Ahaz is that, too, we should totally and absolutely rely on our God. May we never rely on anyone else other than our Lord. May we never try to take matters into our own hands like Ahaz did. May we instead humbly submit to our King. May we live in a faithful obedience to him, relying and trusting in him, knowing that he is in control of all things. Now, those are two ideas that I think we can learn. We could preach a whole sermon on this passage, but we're doing something different for our Christmas season. Let's take a step back and return to this big picture biblical narrative idea. Matthew, which we read earlier on, said that the virgin birth of Jesus fulfilled what the prophet said in this passage. That virgin will conceive and give birth to a son and name him Emmanuel. Now, if we take that directly and literally, that now that we know the context, becomes kind of problematic, doesn't it? Because it feels like Matthew is just pulling a verse from the Old Testament, stripping out of its context and not really caring about what's happening and just saying, hey, this proves that Jesus is the Christ. Now the other concern that might come up from this is not just that, and that the prophecy seems to be pulled from its context, but maybe Matthew's making stuff up. Like maybe Matthew is like just making stuff up about Jesus and just trying to prove something that actually isn't true or didn't happen. Like if Matthew couldn't get this one little detail right, then how can we trust that anything else he says about Jesus is true or reliable? Now, those are two fair questions to ask as we see this dissonance, potential dissonance here. But I think there's actually a really simple way to solve what's going on here. And it comes down to how we understand what it means for something to be fulfilled. When we hear that something's fulfilled, what we hear in our context, in our world today, is that someone made a prediction about the future, and then that future arrives and it comes true. That prediction comes true. That's what we think of when something is fulfilled. But in the ancient world, fulfillment had a much broader meaning. It could mean that, but it could mean so much more. It could carry this idea of something being completion, of something being being happening again and again and again, there's a number of different ways fulfillment could mean. So when it comes to this dynamic of Matthew quoting a prophet that seemed to have something to say in his day, and Matthew saying something today, there's a couple of different ways that we could understand the type of fulfillment Matthew's doing here. So there's three different options that we could look at, three different categories. The first option, the first category, we could call direct fulfillment. This is the idea that a prophecy is made, and then when the future comes, that prediction comes true. That's how we think of fulfillment a lot of times. We could picture this as a guy pointing to a star saying, this is going to happen, this is when it happens, this is what happens. Now, if that's true, in Matthew's context, that means that this prophecy about the sign that was given to Ahaz was always about Jesus' birth. That it was never about anything in Ahaz's day, but it was about something that would happen far in the future about Jesus. Here's my issue and why I reject this approach. I don't think this is direct fulfillment. One, it doesn't honor the context of the passage. Why would this be a sign to Ahaz if Ahaz is never able to see this sign take place? Why would the following verses 15, 16, 17, be about the ramifications of this sign in Ahaz's day if it was a sign that was later on? But the second idea to consider about this is it doesn't even make sense in Matthew's gospel itself. Matthew says that the virgin birth will have a son, the virgin will conceive and have a son, and the son will be named Emmanuel. But the angel says that the son is going to be named Jesus. The son of the virgin is named Jesus, not Emmanuel. The son of the virgin is named Yahweh saves, not God is with us. If we read Matthew, that's exactly what it says. So it can't be direct fulfillment, I don't think. I think there's got to be something else going on here. The second option is what we could call double fulfillment. Some of you might be familiar with this if you've done much study. This is a common approach to solving this dilemma. This would be the idea that there was one local, recent, current fulfillment of that prophecy when the prophecy was made. But then there would be a second, later, future, fuller, complete fulfillment of this prophecy later. In this context, that would mean that the original prophecy to Ahaz was fulfilled in Ahaz's day with the birth of a child that was named Emmanuel. But then that prophecy was always going to be about a second, later, better, the final, really true prophecy being fulfilled in Jesus' birth. So it's saying that a prophecy could be fulfilled more than once, basically. We can imagine it kind of as a man pointing to two stars, where the second star is bigger as a way to represent the fuller, greater, more final, more complete version of the prophecy. Now, I think this is a better approach than the first approach, because it does honor the historical context. My issue with this approach is that it doesn't seem to honor, it doesn't seem to match with what we understand about biblical prophecy. When biblical prophets made signs to people, they were always meant to be single signs that were meant for specific people in specific circumstances and a specific purpose. We don't have evidence that signs were meant to be used multiple times in multiple situations. Beyond that, why stop at two fulfillments? Why can't we make this be a third fulfillment sometime or a fourth fulfillment? There's not really any good guardrails. This is a theory of fulfillment that is kind of retroactively placed on biblical prophecy rather than us going to biblical prophecy and building an idea of fulfillment from it. So I don't think a double fulfillment is quite the best approach either. The way I would approach this, the way that I think is best way to understand this, is a third approach that I am calling typological fulfillment, or typological fulfillment might be another way you can pronounce it. This is the idea that when the author is looking at prophecies and saying prophecies are fulfilled, he is not saying that a prediction in the past is coming to fruition in this current future. Rather, the author is looking at his current events and looking back and saying, man, the stuff that's going on right now looks a whole lot like some stuff that happened back then. They're noticing parallels and creating a theological emphasis through these parallels. The image we could use is of two stars. Instead of someone looking forward to the two stars, it's a person looking back, and the current star, the star in his present day, is hollowed out because he's looking through the star to events in the past and seeing parallels and connections. And I think that matches exactly what Matthew's doing here through this idea. Matthew here is not saying that what happened in Ahaz's day was a direct fulfillment that's happening in the virgin birth of Jesus. Rather, he's saying, man, there's some stuff that's lining up with some of the language and themes and ideas that happened back then. He's making parallel connections and using the wordplay and themes to draw some really important thematic meanings about the significance of Jesus' birth. And it's so interesting. He pulls specifically from the Greek translation, not the Hebrew translation. He pulls from the translation that says a virgin will conceive, not of an Alma will conceive. And I think that's important. So he's making these comparisons and showing that there's a ramping up idea, that God's redemption story happens over and over again. That through typological connection, it's basically saying not that this prediction happened and it comes true, but it's saying what God has done in the past, I'm seeing it happen again. The redemption that God has done before, it's taking place now in a greater, more amazing way. So back then, there was a woman that conceived and gave birth, but now a virgin is conceiving and giving birth. Back then, Emmanuel was a name that was symbolic, but here, in the moment of Jesus coming to be born, is Emmanuel coming literally. That this is so significant that it's not just a symbol that God is with us symbolically, but that God actually entered our world through human flesh. That through the virgin birth of Jesus, God took on human form, flesh and blood, to dwell with us, to be with us, to reside in our presence, to be in our midst, to join our story. And then third and finally, just like back then, God said that there would be deliverance and salvation. It was salvation for a nation against armies. But today, in the birth of Jesus, Matthew is saying, today, God is bringing salvation again, but this time it's in a greater, more fuller, more amazing way. It's to the world from salvation from sin, deliverance, rescue from sin. It's a bigger, more fuller thing. It's a picture that Matthew is portraying. So Matthew here, he's not trying to make a prediction coming true idea by reciting the virgin birth story. What he is saying is something so profound and real, that God is at work again, that God is bringing complete, true, full redemption through Jesus. He's telling us something about who Jesus is, that Jesus isn't just, that through Jesus, God isn't just some distant person. But it's a reminder in sharing this story over again and hearkening back to the story before that God is a person that comes in the midst of crisis and delivers us from crisis. It happened with Ahaz and Judah, and it happens again with Jesus. That God says, I want to come near you and enter your story. I want to be with you in your worry, in your struggles, in your pain, in your weakness, in your situation. And he has done that totally and truly through Jesus. Through this amazing picture that Matthew paints, he's actually giving more credibility and credential to Jesus. He's not making an arbitrary connection, but he's making a theological connection that's saying this is really significant what's happening. That a virgin conceived miraculously, and that a child was born, a child who fulfills and embodies God with us in its entirety. What Matthew is trying to teach us about the virgin birth could be said in this way. The virgin birth is God saying, I am really with you, and are you really with me? I am in your midst. I am coming to you. I am bringing salvation and deliverance. I am with you. But are you going to be with me? That's what he's doing by hearkening back to Ahaz. Because in Ahaz's situation, it's an echo again. That just like God's redemption echoes over and over and it comes to fulfillment in Jesus and ramps up and crescendos in Jesus, the same thing could be true about responding to the sign. For Ahaz, he saw this sign and he had two options. He could have accepted the sign and been faithful to God, or he could have rejected the sign and turned away from God. And similarly to us, we have the same potential response. We can either accept the sign that God has given us. We can accept and be faithful to God, or we can reject it and turn it away. And this is not something that we should just ponder or think lightly, but like Ahaz, our decision, our response to recognizing the sign or rejecting the sign can have devastating, immense consequences and effects. It can either bring deliverance and salvation and rescue, or it can bring judgment and destruction. And so we are in Ahaz's shoes, and we are wondering, and we're asking ourselves, where are we going to land? Are we going to accept the sign that God's given us, or are we going to reject it? Are we going to stand in faithfulness to our God and King, or are we going to take matters into our own hands and rely on our own power and ability? It can be one of two ways. But the virgin birth is God saying, I am really with you. And are you really with me? I hope that during this Christmas season that you don't just glaze over this little detail in the story of Jesus, but instead you allow the masterful artistic work of Matthew play into reflection of your life as you ponder this question. And may you, at the end of the day, respond by saying, oh Lord, my sovereign God, I am with you. And there's some of you today that may have never responded in that way. You may still be like Ahaz, who is continuing to turn away from God and reject him. But today, my encouragement to you is see Jesus for who he truly is. That he is the Christ, the one prophesied to come, the one that Matthew says is the fulfillment, the completion of the redemption of God, but also that he is God in the flesh, dwelling in our midst, saying he is with you, and he invites you to be with him. And so maybe today, if you've never made that chance to respond and be with God and give your life to Jesus, consider making that decision today. Don't be like Ahaz. Take a better